So I do want to introduce our guest today, and we're really lucky that by going to a virtual format, we're able to include our guest today because our guest today is based in Singapore, and that's why we're starting things off early this morning. So Zachary Ames is an experienced leadership and talent development partner, having worked across multiple industries, most recently financial services. Currently based in Singapore with Bloomberg LP, he started his career in New York City shortly after graduating. While in Logan, Zachary was an honors student, heavily involved in student activities, president of the Greek Council, and recipient of the 2008 Bill E. Robbins Award. Like all alumni that year, he faced immediate difficulty entering the workforce amid the great financial crisis. Through some grit, luck, and good old-fashioned Aggie street smarts, he has put his 2 degrees of sociology and economics to good use, combining his passion for both people and business. So please help me in welcoming Zach Ames. And Zach, I'm going to start you off with the first question, which is to tell us a little bit about your history and how you came to be in your position today.
Fantastic. Thank you for having me. And especially for those of you who are joining, I recognize this is a lunch series, but it is 10 p.m. here in Singapore. So thank you for making this a special breakfast series on my behalf today. So to the extent of how did I end up here, it's actually been a really nice moment for me to reflect on that question. I think I have always been somewhat ambitious, and I've always lived in a very future-focused world. And it's been good to give a little pause and just to look back and realize just everything that took place to really get to where I am. And so some of you may actually be wondering, what is leadership and talent development? I honestly didn't even know that was a career option when I first started. So when it comes, it often sits in the human resources function. And we specialize in managing the talents, so to speak, or employees and their development, making sure that we have the best talent, we've identified the best talent, and then more importantly, give them what they need to continue in their careers. So a little bit different than traditional HR of, actually I remember my HR professor told me, oh, you don't want to major in that, it's all hiring and firing. What I wanted to do was much more human-centric, actually, the bit of irony from HR, is working with people, helping develop them, making them better and stronger, and therefore hopefully the companies get better and stronger from that as well. So if we go to the next slide, that was not my initial plans or trajectory. My dream ever since I was little was actually to be a gastrointestinal pediatric surgeon. Very specific, and I knew that at like 5 or 6 years old. I would actually go and watch on Discovery Health. They had a show called Operation, and it was just unedited operations, and that was my family's dinner conversation, was whatever thing I saw that day. So that was the other big thing that I think often has given me pause, is like, how did I not go and do that thing? And actually, on the next slide, you'll see where I really got my foundation in all of this was starting through scouting. So not only as an Eagle Scout, but particularly, if anyone is familiar with Order of the Arrow, I was doing what I do now, but just for fun as a teenager. And I am a nerd in that way. I did think it was fun. I was on national committees and held different positions that I was going and teaching, facilitating conversations, helping people develop and look at those kinds of things, not even knowing that that could be something. I just enjoyed sitting in classrooms, learning, being a student of people, and everything there. So that was my foundation, kind of unknowingly, and I became a believer of do what you love and the rest will follow. And one of the things that I also recognized was I watched my father, who is a brilliant architect, but at times struggled on the business side of things, was a great practitioner. So for me, I also knew if I wanted to be, say as an example, I loved river running. I knew my future wouldn't just be a guide, I would probably own an expedition company. So to be successful, I needed some of that business background. So I entered Logan, and I will say that that was a sanctioned trip on top of Old Main. We did have supervision with us, but a phenomenal memory there, looking up at the tower. So I actually entered with a marketing degree, because I thought I need to get on the business side of things. I need to understand that better. And I remember very distinctly, though, sitting in an accounting class, and L was a variable in an equation for labor. And in order for us to hit the bottom line, we just deleted it and made it 100 less than what it was. And for me, it was not a number, those were lives, those were people's families, those were people impacted in our community, those were potential consumers, those were brand advocates. It was all of these things that that ripple effect had. And so for me, that wasn't a variable. And I kind of my liberal bleeding heart moment, and I kind of quit the business school and I ran across the quad and signed up for a sociology degree, and took everything possible by Dr. Glass, and but also became a bit of a thorn probably in the side, because I also still had a very strong economics and business background. And so challenging certain things that were sometimes very far left in terms of the views. And then I was still pursuing an economics degree, which I was also a thorn in their side, because instead of talking about minimum wage, I was arguing living wage. And I still think that is one of the best things, and a small touch of advice is the more well-rounded you can be in the experience of that, the better that you are in the long run, because so many people really do just become ingrained in their one school of thought without thinking about the other side, or the impact, or how that starts to play and the dynamics across them. So as mentioned in the opening, the other big thing is we didn't have a degree that some other colleges have, of like an organizational psychology or those kinds of things that maybe would be a little bit more direct link into what I do. So I decided to build it myself externally through my experiences. So that's why I got so heavily involved and ran for student body president, was on the activities boards, got involved in Greek life, and everything I could to experience what I was trying to do versus necessarily have the textbook component. So all of that combined created a very kind of the polar opposite of what was left and what was right in thinking of economics and sociology, combined in the middle with some as much experience as I could recreate in terms of the way organizations ran, leadership, et cetera there. So then I graduated. And so you'll see on the next slide, this is my best group of friends that we still get together every Christmas. I still fly home wherever I am in the world that week. And it's amazing how, when this was taken, this obviously was just us goofing off, but I think it captures really well the spirit of what it was like to graduate in 2008. So if you will recall, obviously the great financial crisis happened. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but went from graduating with a lot of hope. And I had always had the dream, and a couple people actually in that picture, we had all made a little pact that we were going to move to New York together. A couple of us did, most of them did not. And if you'll see, so in that, I also was a bit prepared and started saving money, because I knew I wasn't just going to go blind. And I knew that New York was, of course, a much more expensive city than something like Logan. So I worked all summer just to stock up as much as possible, and worked at Market Street Grill. And at the bottom of every one of my tickets, I actually had written New York City. And just this daily reminder that every single thing that I was working towards, every tip I was getting, was to help get me to that dream. And I ended up getting there. So on the next slide, New York City was not only the goal and dream, but it became a reality. And I got a one-way plane ticket, packed a big duffel bag, and left my mother in tears at the kitchen table with her youngest boy leaving. I'm the only person in my family who lives outside of maybe a 30-minute radius. So this was absolutely a big leap, but an amazing experience. On the next slide, you'll see kind of what was my experience there. So as I mentioned, again, the great financial crisis in 2008, one of my roommates was actually with Lehman Brothers at the time. So I remember when it was announced that it was going under, he was the first person that we talked to, and we just waited every day, kind of going, did you get your pink slip? Are you fired yet? Did you get your pink slip? And he was one of the very lucky few who got sucked into Barclays Capital, and even spun off of his group into a different department. So he was very lucky. But it brought New York to its knees. I remember even from a networking perspective, again, having worked on national level stuff with, Greek life and these other things, I had people in my network was smart around what I was trying to accomplish. And one person even said, I'm not saying anything to HR because I don't want my name in their mouths for any reason. So people who I even had, who I thought were reliable, different leads, different sources, all of that stuff just came to a screeching halt. And I wasn't alone. Obviously, I even talked to someone earlier today who they said they graduated in 2007 and again felt massive impact of that wave of us who came in early in careers, total hiring freezes everywhere you could. But I was determined and dogged to stay. So I just went and worked at Banana Republic and I made that, whatever might have been $10 an hour just to pay my rent to stay in that city and keep fighting. About 8 or 10 months into that, which started out just as a holiday gig over the Christmas, I actually landed my first real job. A bit blind on what I don't think many people use it now, but monster.com, just threw out my resume, and I then called the company. I didn't hear back from them, and they were in their final rounds of interviews and brought me in, and I was really lucky to actually have started with them. So they were a small boutique firm that did training and development for other companies, and so I helped manage the roster of coaches that they had. They were based out of London, so I gained really quick exposure to what it means to be in a real career. My father, again, as mentioned, as an architect, it was a bit of a mom and pop shop. I remember even my first resume one summer, I think in high school or college, I wrote this 10-page resume because I included every accomplishment and every award that I'd ever gotten from any group or activity or any of this kind of stuff, and just kind of getting laughed out of certain different interviews and not fully comprehending it, and just realizing this is the major leagues and this is what real life is like. This is just how do you show up to meetings? What does it mean to talk across cultures and into a global organization? How do you manage just at that scale, coaches who were in Denver to New York to anywhere else, and just the big personalities who all had a major careers. So it's a phenomenal learning experience, and but really gave me a reality check of what I was getting into versus the dream. And then sadly became unemployed less than a year into that real job. So laid off, some difficult circumstances. And I was there again because of the difficulty of just that economy, the long lasting impact of that. So I was fortunate enough, I had a friend I was on a volleyball league. If you can't see me sitting down, but I'm about 6'5", 6'6", so a naturally gifted volleyball player. And through that, in terms of networking, I was able to get a few gigs. He was a consultant on the communication side, which was really helpful. So I got a little bit more peek into different companies, and it wasn't intentional, but we were working with companies like Tiffany and Company, Burberry, and some others, and got to do some personality and psychometric analysis and other things of that nature, which just gave me, again, more exposure. It wasn't full-time or anything, but just enough to really start to expose myself further on what some of that could be. Luckily, that didn't last too long. I mean, it was plenty long, a little over a year. But on the next is where things really started to shape up and take off. So I then, if anyone knows the retailer Bloomingdale's, it's very iconic in New York, actually owned by Macy's Inc. This is really where I cut my teeth and got to do all those things that I always wanted to. So with the other companies, I was doing a bit of consulting, or I managed the coaches and their schedules, but I wasn't actually the one up in front of the room facilitating anything or getting to be, helping coach people through their careers. So this gave me my real taste of what my career meant and what it could be. And so I managed all of the executive development programs, so all the first-time graduates into the buyer training program. I ran and created their internship program. We developed an analyst development program for some of the broader support functions, and then got up to the point where I was actually working with various vice presidents and their annual engagement surveys to see how are they doing, how's the department, what are the things that they need to change, or what changes can we implement to make life better for their employees at work. Just as a random sidebar, I actually got this job because I went on a blind date or went speed dating, and typically the first question is, oh, so what do you do? But we didn't actually do that. We just started talking about all things of our love of New York theater and all this other stuff. And then later it came up, and I just followed up and just not asking for a job, but just wanted to say what you do. I was just someone who was an HR director, and because of that conversation and just my natural aptitude and interest and love of the space, he actually called me a little bit later and said, hey, there's a job here that would be open. Was not interested in pursuing the romantic thing. It literally was just a random connection and being at the right place at the right time. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, why I think that's important, just saying yes to certain things. The other big piece of my life in New York was also performing, and I joined the People's Improv Theater and was on a house team for a few months there. And this became really critical, especially again in hindsight, of identifying in today's world, we are very heavy in consuming information, consuming entertainment. It's really easy, and I find myself, again, still sitting on the couch watching Netflix for hours. But what an amazing opportunity it is to actually find a space to create, to explore ideas, concepts, and to find a tribe that also believes in some of those same things as well. And if anyone knows some of the basic core tenets of improv is to say yes and to build things, to bring positivity to the situation. But the bigger piece is always, how do I adapt? How do I take what's in front of me and shift versus assuming, unlike a play, it's scripted, I have to memorize it and it has to be perfect. All of this is a very different style, which again, probably in Q&A or some resilience conversations we'll get to. Obviously, there's some really clear links and ties there. So the other piece, I mentioned volleyball. This was, again, another great opportunity. Someone in my volleyball league knew that I was kind of hitting a bit of a peak at Bloomingdale's, and I was wanting something a bit bigger. Retail is a really tough industry right now, and even was back then, 4 or 5 years ago. So I was trying to figure out, how do I get into finance? How do I get into tech? How do I get into a stronger space for what I want to do? Again, I managed all those coaches at that boutique firm, and the people who had the most versatility and their ability to go to different companies were the ones with those bigger finance, tech, bigger, meatier industries. So on the next slide, you'll see from that conversation, he actually worked at Bloomingdale or Bloomberg. I like the Blooms. And from that, under one roof, it is one of the most unique companies that I have now gained exposure to the financial services industry. I have technology because so much of what we build and create is from a heavy computer science and engineering background. I work directly now here in Singapore with our global data team, so data management and analysts, all of our analysts and whatnot, as well as we have an entire news and media department, which is, again, is a whole other section, which is just phenomenal to start to look at. And this, well, I love it, and I have no current plans to leave. It was also a very strategic decision, recognizing from here I can spin off into so many other areas, whether that's as a generalist, or I could go and specialize and say, oh, finance is really where I want to spend the next few years, or maybe I want to go into tech or Silicon Valley or something like that. From this, again, another massive change to everything that I've been able to explore and understand about the world. So Bloomingdale's was US-centric, but again, across, and I worked on the corporate side, so it was very New York-centric. Bloomberg is global. We've got 19,000 people across 120 offices, I believe, most of those being news bureaus. And my first job was actually to go in with their diversity and inclusion team and roll out a training program. So I got on a plane to travel to Asia for the first time ever about 4 years ago, and just completely changed my life forever. To really see what that was like, to land in Hong Kong and see the where East really meets West in some dynamic ways, getting to go to London, working with even people in San Francisco, et cetera, and just seeing what that is truly like. And then The bigger piece also is I was now at a point in my career where I wasn't just cutting my teeth and learning, I was actually contributing, right? I was sitting in a space where they said, here's what we want you to do, go do it. And the autonomy to just go, here's your target. We want you to go and deliver this training for about 2,500 people across the world, figure it out and make it happen. For many people, even myself, at moments it was very daunting, but at the same time was so empowering to have that responsibility and freedom to do that. And then from a growth perspective, I work day in and day out with some of the most senior leaders at Bloomberg. Here in the region, I coach directly some of our regional leads of entire business units. And then again, this idea of projects at scale. How do you roll out something that's global? Last year, I've run a couple global programs. Last week, I was just assigned. We're running, these performance evaluation conversations at mid-year, but this year obviously is so dynamic and so different that we don't have the traditional components of people aren't even doing the same jobs when they started the year. We've just been a roll up your sleeves and get this thing done to maintain business. So how do you have that? And so I'm now trying to rack my brain. Okay, what are the core competencies that we're looking at? What are the behaviors? And then the biggest thing is how do we get every manager trained on this in real time and turned around? And so how am I networking effectively? Do I know not only the content, but do I know the business well enough so I can make the link that it doesn't feel or look academic, that it actually feels like a value add? So it has just been the most phenomenal roller coaster of a career. Still, as I said, very happy where I am, loving my time in Asia. It was always on my list, my career bucket list to live abroad. I'm very fortunate to be where I am right now. So the other big kind of silver lining on the next slide, and this is just a little bit more personal, is again this idea of adventure. I have now been able to, these are pictures from Taipei and Angkor Wat to Seven Wonders of the World of the Taj Mahal. The scuba diving is actually at Komodo Island, one of the only 2 islands in the world that actually have Komodo dragons, and I got to go and see those. And this is pre-COVID, but still terrible air quality in Shanghai, but in front of the Shanghai Tower and other things there. So it's just been phenomenal. And again, for me, sums it up. That I think it is important for people to be completely hold tight to your dreams. I know growing up, I didn't always have dreams felt just like that. It was a dream, right? Even when I was in New York, people would ask me, or even often they would ask my mom, how did he do it? It was often this baffling thing. And I didn't have a lot of role models who said, this is how to do it, or that even it's possible to try. And even in terms of my career, there were so many moments, especially when I was unemployed and struggling or desperate or frustrated, that it would have been so easy just to say, okay, I'm going to go take the cliche account management job at the whatever firm just to, and not in a bad way, but to get by. But even if I had done that, I think I still would have always had this dream career that I wanted. And so for me, what I found was amazing is that by opening my mouth and saying what it was that I wanted to the volleyball player, right? Or even with the person that I met at speed dating and saying, this is what I want to do, instead of saying what I thought people wanted me to do, or what I thought might fit in the conversation, or what I recognized, oh, that person has an opportunity. Let me adjust the thing that I want to fit so I can meet that other need. But I never would have been happy, and I would never have had the career that I had. And my best friend who was in that graduation picture, we actually, every year on our anniversary of New York, we'd go to dinner, and a couple years in, we both just looked at each other and just jaw on the floor and said our dreams came true. She wanted to be in event planning. She actually ran the student activities board. And I wanted to be and work in this field of leadership, and we both did it. It was hard. We both did not start there. She was a nanny for a little while. I was in retail and, folding sweaters. But holding on to that dream and not being ashamed of what that dream is was so important. But the second piece is the other side of it, is that you also need to be willing to do everything that you need to do to make it come true. And sometimes it is being down in the dirt, rolling up your sleeves, not having some of the glamour that comes with it. I think often just someone like me coming and talking. I can show you these wonderful pictures of these wonderful places, but it didn't just happen overnight, and it wasn't just luck. There was a lot of luck in there, but it was also a lot of hard work and a lot of days and experiences that would not necessarily equate to where I am had it not been for being very deliberate and taking the right steps. So it was a very long-winded answer to how I got here, but hopefully it's helpful in a few lessons along the way.
Awesome, great. Yeah, so Zach, I just wanted to ask you some questions, and you touched a little bit about this during your presentation, but when you graduated, please feel free to expand a bit more on it. When you graduated in 2008, what was kind of your general outlook as far as your job searching went, and what other concerns did you personally have, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah, obviously a lot of concerns. Number one, how to pay rent in New York City. That was prime. I mean, you just go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Can I feed myself, and can I have a warm bed? The other pieces of that, I think, was for me a big component was connection and having community and identifying people who I could be supported by and supported with through some of those difficult times, but also finding some of the silver linings and trying to create an environment that wasn't as that felt overwhelming, and finding those moments of release and positivity throughout. The other piece is that, again, a bit of that like dogged pursuit. Even though people weren't hiring, it didn't mean that there wasn't an opportunity to still learn and be kind of a perpetual student of my industry and of my craft. So I would get on, it wasn't every day, but I would try to reach out to people, and it was LinkedIn, I think, was probably still very new and very different than what it is now. But saying, oh, this person, would you mind spending 15, 30 minutes with me? Whether that was a phone call or, what in New York, more corporate terms, like, can we go grab a coffee? Just going and saying, can we chat and can I pick your brain? It's an interesting one because, again, even in LinkedIn and a lot of stuff I'm reading right now, a lot of people are saying, don't ask someone to pick their brain. But I actually have found that to be really a good tactic, as long as and the real honest truth of someone who's fresh out of college, particularly in an environment like this where the job market is rough, you aren't privileged to be in a position where you are also bringing a ton of value. And I think that's often what people say is like, well, you should be bringing something and there should be an exchange. And most people actually love, I have found time and time again, and it's actually why I said yes to this opportunity. People love, one, talking about themselves, sharing their experiences, helping people out. So that was a big thing for me as well, is identifying a few key people and just saying, can I grab 30 minutes and can I ask you some questions? And when I saw things that were confusing on job posts, I would try to bring that into conversation. Can you explain what this thing means? Or how does your company approach X? Even though I knew nothing about what X was, I saw it in the job profile, so I'm going to ask someone about it and try to learn what that thing was. So that was also really important for me as well, beyond just the maintain some sanity and productivity through the long days without work.
So Zach, my next question is to ask how this global crisis is similar to the one you faced, and how is it different? Which we would imagine it would be, but how do you see the overlap?
The similarities, obviously, I think the impact right now, I don't know, is totally felt on the job front. I think it's an interesting one where we know a lot of people are filing for unemployment. It isn't necessarily all across on the corporate space. I think a lot of the stuff I'm looking at it's maybe smaller scale firms. Even Bloomberg, as an example, is still very aggressive in their hiring and their targets for hiring. A lot of those bigger firms are just simply adapting the way in which they hire. So there's part of me that is good. I think there's a lot of faith to be had that some of these larger, especially on the financial institution side, think that there's some positive and some runway trajectory out of all of this. That said, I think the biggest difference for me in this is in 2008, and even in other times of various, crises, it always felt like you knew what the trajectory was. Or even if it didn't, even though it wasn't 100% certain, there were still some economic reports that kind of said, oh, we'll see a turnaround in this amount of time. And I think the biggest challenge right now when people particularly talk about resilience, the big emotion that most people are facing right now is the idea of uncertainty. That we don't fully even understand what's happening to us now in its entirety. More importantly, we don't know what it's going to continue to look like, right? Whether that's just because of conflicting reporting, whether that's just because of conflicting views of how we should approach things. I think that is the biggest one of, I knew that I could kind of dig my heels in and I could still actually go get a retail job. Right now, people can't go get retail jobs, right? The idea of even just trying to make ends meet right now is often very difficult for people. That said, I'm always inspired by this anecdote, whether I don't know that this is a true story. I've tried to actually go and research it, but there's an old adage of Einstein when he was a professor gave out a test and students, filled out all the assistants went and handed them out. It was the final exam. Students filled them all out, turned them back in. They all got 100 because, of course, Einstein was their professor, or whatever it might be. And then the next year, he went to give out the final exam, and the assistants all looked at the test and said, you can't do this. It's the exact same test. You need to change it. People will know the answers from last year. People have cheated and told him. And he said, the questions might be the same, but the answers are different. And I think oftentimes in life, and I often use that reference for people in business, is that the questions that people are facing, whether there's a massive crisis or if what we're trying to figure out or the emotions I'm dealing with, how do I make ends meet, right? Any of those questions are often the exact same. You could even go back to when I interviewed my grandparents who lived through the Great Depression. I was probably asking them the same questions, but the answers are very different because of the context. And to be honest, 12 years difference, the biggest one is also technology. 12 years ago, I didn't have the world at my fingertips and a smartphone that I could literally create a business tomorrow with, drop shipping to identifying quick flips in real estate or doing an ebook and an e-learning on or video web-based tutorials on how to do ... right? So I think for me, that's the other big one, is that while depending on where any of you are thinking where you want to work, what might be a more traditional path might look like it's a far more difficult one. That doesn't mean that there aren't other paths that I actually think are far more accessible than they have ever been in really history at this time. So if you're smart and, able to kind of put some of that together and identify a market and get a quick product together, you could really create something while sitting on your couch in ways that I don't know that other people have always been able to do with zero to little capital, right? Wi-Fi connection and a phone, you can actually create a lot for yourself right now.
Thanks. Let's see. Other question I have is, we hear a lot about like the economic outlook here in the United States, but since you're working internationally as well, what's the general consensus internationally? What areas of concern are there, as well as what areas of opportunities are being discussed?
There is no consensus. I think that is, again, back to that idea of uncertainty. That's one of the challenges, is different, whether it's because of geography or politics, everyone is tackling this differently and are impacted in different ways. So very similarly, right, depending on just making that comparison of New York, which is densely populated, versus Utah, which is less so, even the way that we're approaching that is shifting. So you look at something like India, which is one of the most densely populated nations, their ability to maintain certain standards or practices look nothing like what Sweden is, where they kind of already more or less have quote unquote reopened. So the challenge in all of that is we got to a point, I think, within the history, particularly from a business perspective, of such an interconnected world. And one of the biggest challenges that, or where people have been hurt the most in their business operations, is their supply chain. And identifying that the moment we shut down borders, or that factories and manufacturing, whether it's in China or India, or quite frankly, even a lot of that in the last few years has moved out of China into Africa. All of that has now really halted and made people look at their business plans, make them relook at their strategy, look at, I think you're going to see a lot more diversification of supply chains versus what people kind of were doubling down and trying to get single suppliers to get these low costs. And I think that's going to be some major shifts. I think we won't have an answer on that or the consensus for a while. I think the big thing to look at is China is, again, it's just because I'm super close to it. A lot of people didn't even realize that China had shut down. And I think that was really interesting is I started getting the phone calls and the texts and the worry and the concern when New York shut down, not when Asia shut down. So my colleagues in China and Hong Kong and even here in Singapore, we've been in this place for a long time. We've been dealing with this for many more weeks than the rest of the world. And yet the nice thing is that Wuhan, even the epicenter of this whole thing, they're reopened. My friends in Shanghai, they are actually out to brunch without masks on right now. And so that to me is, we just need to keep an eye and see where they're going and what we think some of that turnaround is. And it's just going to be a lot of case studies right now and looking at, because everyone hit this at such different periods, that there is no good answer to that question. I think the one thing we do know is that business in particular at a global scale will not be the same in terms of the way we approach it, the scale of it. I do think will recognize, again, from a continuation of automation and technology coming in, the simple fact that we're doing this session in this format, the fact that Zoom stock up is in an insane percentage. Even the way that we think about our physical space of work, the way that we consider talent, and that I may not actually need to sit next to Joe, right? He could sit in Utah and I could sit in Singapore, and we could actually make this work. So I think this has completely opened up people's eyes to the capacity and the ability to be productive. And some of the more stagnant, more traditional business models are going to shift dramatically, which I think is really exciting. I think it's going to be a very innovative time. It's still a long runway till we're back up to any normalcy. I think the airline industry in particular, many of them have talked about 4, 5, 6 years until they get back to 2019 numbers. But even that, I think there's potential. I say very respectfully and know that in the midst of this is massive crisis. But I think there's a lot potentially in silver linings to come out of this, of efficiencies in our business models, and many other things of that nature. So who knows? Wait and see.
Wonderful, Zach. And before we go to our last question from us, I do want to remind those listening that if you have questions for Zach, we're going to be moving to the Q&A shortly. So you can put those in the Q&A section here in WebEx. You'll see the Q&A under the chat. Feel free to ask Zach a question if there's something you'd like him to speak to before we close today. So Zach, what I would like to end by asking you is, what advice would you have for graduating seniors or students entering the job force, or listeners who are looking or thinking about switching jobs soon? I have friends who weren't necessarily happy in their current roles, and they were actually looking for a new job, and now suddenly that's come to a halt. So as someone who graduated in 2008 and faced those uncertainties, and as someone who trains employees, what advice would you have?
I think from a almost like agnostic of the current situation, one of the big things I always advise people, regardless of their background, and now again, if you actually have a little more time on your hands, the amount that is out there to be able to learn and upskill yourself is phenomenal. And much of it is free online. So I would, the basics of some data analysis and some basic statistics, the ability to know how to use Excel spreadsheets, even my team who is not data-based and not analytical in any way, everyone is asking us about the return on the investment that they're giving us. Even when we have to, I mean, again, when I talk about at scale, right, with a global company, if you have to sort through what I do, I'm teaching a roster of 2,500 people and cut that by geography and by gender and by tenure. Like, it's such subtle stuff, but if you've never exposed yourself to that or know what a VLOOKUP is and how to compare two data sets, this is not advanced Excel. I'm not saying you need to go and get master level of this stuff. But there's just some certain basics of what it means to be in the workforce and the way that people operate that most people don't even recognize or know. So might feel kind of weird in this setting to say it, but that is one I give to everyone all the time. Just know some of those basic pieces to be a contributing member. And it will actually give you the leg up in an environment where, say, if you're going into social work, if you're the one social worker on the team who can actually pull some of that data, do a quick analysis, and actually talk to people around the percentage increase that X had, you are going to become a star, right? And it's actually really subtle, simple stuff. And then from that, and it's a bit similar, it's not a regret, but the one thing that I wish I had been able to do, and again, I recognize right now it might not be in the same format of a capital I internship, but I didn't take advantage of gaining experience. It's an interesting one when you look at your competitive landscape, again, where I actually ran internship programs and have worked at scale with companies who have rigorous recruitment cycles, and the schools who are on they know that in order to get this, they've taken the internship and the person's had 2 real world experiences before they get into their real job. It doesn't need to necessarily be an internship. It doesn't need to be with a big company, but your ability, even if it was, say, my Banana Republic experience, if I had actually been able to get into like an assistant manager position, my ability to speak to real experience of giving feedback, of my ability to manage other people, to better understand the communication style. Experience will trump everything, even as particularly from what we teach, right? So if I'm working with a new leader who's trying to work on, maybe it's communication skills. Most people go, okay, let's put him on a course and give him a model and help him teach him what the 4 C's of communication are, whatever it is. But we actually know that that's only about 10% of the learning process. 20% is a bit of exposure, whether that's with your mentors or whatever, but 70% is actually experiential. The more I could teach you over this, and I've done it with many people, I could teach you how to give a great presentation. You're going to learn and implement everything you've learned when you're actually on a stage in front of a group of people and then reflect on that experience. Or every time you go into a meeting and you try that new thing and actually see what that's like. Or the more times you're with someone else and they're doing that thing. So whatever it is for you, gain as much experience. And a lot of that can be free. A lot of that can be in subtle ways. That's why I believe so much in extracurricular activities. It's what I did unintentionally. I didn't know any of this theory or philosophy behind it, but that's what I did. I went out and I, ran for student body president. I led organizations. I developed, hosted, I was the chair for Mardi Gras. And so I was working with vendors and business relationships and all that stuff that you don't realize is a critical skill. And then you walk into an interview whenever the market is ready for you And you have so much more to talk about versus saying, well, I believe this, or I was taught this, or here's even my certification, my few letters behind my name. It's less important to say, I'm accredited or certified in X, than you can actually say, when I was working with this person, here's the thing that happened. And the biggest one of all is swing big. It goes back to be unabashed with your dreams. For me, and again, this is my personal feeling, and it's no disrespect to people who are in the situation or may not have. I don't expect anyone or everyone to have the ambitions that I've had or the experiences I've had in my life. But when I looked at it and the way that I got over a lot of the fear around it was just facing failure in the face. And for me, what that meant is if I went to New York and I didn't get a job and I didn't make it happen and I couldn't pay rent, worst case scenario is either on my credit card or maybe my parents. I bought a one-way plane ticket and I came back, right? And was able probably to find another job, and I would live in their basement and I would get scrappy and do it. But in that moment, a lot of people are worried because they feel they have to start over, but you're not starting from scratch. You're actually starting from experience. And your 20s is the perfect place to go and play and learn and not like, yes, know what your dream is if you have one, but even then go and explore and try that other job at that place. And you'll find that, oh, I actually really like working with people more than I do numbers, even though numbers might be my strong suit. But okay, so then how do I adapt that? How do I, instead of being a data analyst, how do I actually go maybe do more strategy? So I'm engaging with people, or maybe I go and do market research. So it's still data driven, but I'm actually working with concepts and ideas. But you won't know that until you've gone and done it. And so that for me is in all of this, go and do all those things. And the potential silver lining is that there's so many companies out there, especially smaller companies, who are struggling right now with how to make ends meet, that if you have the luxury to be able to say, let me work with you for 3 months, can I be your marketing intern? Can I be whatever that thing is, right? Or can I come shadow you? A lot of people would just really appreciate the access to that. Or can I be, even if you're going to psychology or whatever it is, can I come and work and do admin work? Can I come and do some clerical administrative stuff? The fact that you're in the environment, and that was, again, that first job I had. I was not a coach. I was not training anyone, but I was surrounded by them. And I heard the language. I heard the way they think. Got exposed to all of those things, which became invaluable so that when it was my turn again to interview, I was speaking their language and it wasn't foreign. And they could then see me working with them. And I wasn't trying to be something. I actually had a bit of the insider edge. So there's a lot of different pieces of advice, but I think hopefully thematic across the board.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you, Zach, some questions that are coming in from the audience. One of the first ones that we have here, they're looking for a little bit of advice. Just when was the last time you had a difficult conversation? What did it entail, and what's some advice with dealing with difficult conversations?
Oh, I have difficult conversations all the time. It's part of my job is to train other people on how to do it. My assumption, we probably don't have time to clarify what that person means by difficult. It's often what I find when leaders come to me and say that, what they're actually meaning is I have to difficult message I have to deliver, which often means I have to give feedback to someone. The number one thing I say to people in that situation is the fact that you have labeled it difficult means it will be. It starts with your mindset. So I've shifted and I work with leaders to say, I'm not having a difficult conversation. I'm going to have a meaningful conversation. And the moment you flip the script on yourself around what you're about to embark on, it changes it completely. So if someone was to come and engage with me and say, Zach, I've got some difficult news for you, and that automatically puts me in a place of probably being wrong and you being right, and power dynamics come into play, a lot of emotions start to come into play. But the moment I say this is meaningful and this is important for Zach to know, then it becomes purposeful. The reason there's a gap is I probably want Zach to be doing something else. And there's a reason, right? Whether that's because of my own development that I should be doing, I have the potential to be doing something, or it's meaningful in the fact that it's something for the business that something's happened, or even one-on-one, right? In a personal relationship. It could be your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whatever it is. Sometimes that difficult conversation is, the reason it's difficult is because it's meaningful to you. And so if you can get to a more neutral place on it, just changes what it is. And that's the other big one, is we often like to skirt around. And my other big analogy with leaders is I try my best not to put the onion in the tomato sauce and hide it. If we're meaning to have a conversation that's about something, go have the conversation about that. Don't try to hide it around something else, or this is what I'm kind of thinking, or perhaps if you could, it's not suggestions, it's, I would like to talk to you about this. Because of this action, and often what we miss is the impact, right? And which is often around unintended consequences. And that for me is a great moment to actually share new information for the person that they obviously didn't intend. And the other big one for me is assume best intent. Nobody woke up today saying, I want to make a bad decision. No one woke up today saying, I'm going to try to make so-and-so's life more difficult. We often are all trying to do our very best. And so if you can get curious and not critical, and say, what made that right for that person? It's going to bring a lot better solution, and also just a better tone in your approach.
Okay, thank you. Another one of our viewers out there says, I'm working to build a new inclusive leadership certificate for students at USU. From your perspective, what are the most important components of such a program?
Oh, that is, whoever asked that, if you want to write to me directly, either email, you can get that from Andrea or on LinkedIn. I would actually be happy to spend real time and look at this. It's an interesting conversation because inclusion, so I got my start at Bloomberg on, again, doing diversity and inclusion, and what I was looking at was unconscious bias. And that is very helpful to the extent that it raises awareness, but it often doesn't allow for much behavior change. So from an inclusive leadership perspective, the other piece that I always laugh at when I would talk to my D&I colleagues, now that I'm kind of on the other side, is, for me, inclusive leadership just is what leadership should be. I know that we are at a point in various the course of history where we do need to call it out, and it's important to label this moment and say we need to be inclusive as leaders. That said, the best leaders I've ever seen do this often very naturally, right? They care about the other person. It's even that curious versus critical. Instead of going, why did they do that with a big exclamation point? It's a curious, it's a why did they do that? And how do I learn better? And how do I empathize? How do I attempt to meet their needs? How do I become much more of a servant leader versus the director and they're not doing what I want, versus how do we do this the right way altogether? Yeah, that is a whole, you could do a doctoral thesis on what inclusive leadership means and looks like, and more importantly, what a program could look like. But I think the other elements of program, again, is a bit of exposure and sharing, and how do you create empathy? And that, again, for me, was a massive learning very quickly when I got to New York. I was no longer just one of the many blonde-haired, tall, blue-eyed, cisgendered males, right? That all of a sudden I was working with people who lived in the Bronx and realizing that I remember asking one of my colleagues, I was like, you've never seen a cow before, have you? Or like, you've never jumped on a trampoline. And just like being able, though, to share our world experiences has been so valuable. And then again, doing that, the more and more exposure I've had and the more travel I've done has just allowed me to gain much more empathy. And while you can't obviously send every student abroad, I think there are ways to build empathy, because that to me is at the core. The moment I'm connected to you because I'm related to you means I'm going to be naturally much more inclusive in my behaviors.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So our last question for me real quick is, what do you think the next step in your career is?
That is a great question. For me, I'm really happy where I am. I'm sitting in a strong regional role where I, again, am working on a lot of big global projects. It's meaty, it's fun, it's exciting. I think, again, I'm very much a student of my own work, and my current boss has been phenomenal at exposing me to a lot of things from a much more technical side of what talent management is, and what would be beneficial when you're actually presenting, you know, bigger decisions on talent at the more senior levels. So for me, it's just continuing to gain broader spectrum of knowledge and greater influence across, and some of that more technical expertise that I just don't have. And so I'm just staying hungry and staying, trying to keep that student mentality as I keep growing. Who knows? One day, well, the other big dream has always been to be a professor. That's kind of what I've always done, is the teaching. So that is not my next step, but I would love to be able to not only give back to students, but that environment of group conversations, debating thought, and that kind of stuff is always, that's the other pipe dream someday.
Awesome. All right. Well, Zach, thanks so much for all your advice and everything here. I want to say, the past broadcasts that we had, we'd always say, we wish that you guys were here with us. And Zach, again, we wish you were actually right here. But to be honest, this webinar here, I don't think we could have done unless we actually did use this remote tools and everything here. So thank you so much for being able to stay up a little bit later, actually quite a bit later, I think, for you. But and then yeah, and definitely thank you everyone else who has woke up early so that we could hear us. It was great insight and great advice for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And that invitation to connect goes out to everyone. I really do mean it. Happy to grab conversations with anyone, kind of on any of these topics we've talked about. And best of luck in your next steps.